With the recent victory of the self-proclaimed anarcho-capitalist Javier Milei in Argentina, and his vow to deliver a shock therapy treatment to the country, let's talk about his shitty joke of an ideology. Now, Milei is a whole bag to unpack, just a bag of pure horribleness to be honest, but he is just a mere symptom of a much worse pattern of market deregulation and mass sector privatization in hopes of solving economic inequality. For decades now, we've been fed the lie that markets are the key of solving all of our problems, that if we just deregulate and let the free market do its thing, we'll all be prosperous. However, the people that repeat these slogans either have no idea how capitalism actually works, or are paid by capitalists to say these things. See, capitalism works for only one thing: endless profit creation, or in other words, endless accumulation of capital for capital owners. He's really good at it. But not only is this practice highly unsustainable for the planet, something that we're seeing now with how the free market is dealing with the climate crisis, but it also manifests a contradiction of worker exploitation. To create profit, the capitalist, your employer, has to cut down on cost of production to the bare minimum and try to sell the product for as much as possible. This, however, means cutting back on things like wages, worker protection, unnecessary or more expensive material. You get the point. This is where the government steps in and ensures your protection. But it wasn't always like this. Just about 200 years ago, workers' rights were a mere pipe dream. Things like child labor, 15-hour work shifts, and dying on the jobs were normal. It wasn't until socialists and trade union movements mobilized large numbers of the population to fight for their rights that the government started taking into account the interests of the working class. Back to Milei, anarcho-capitalism seeks to completely abolish the state and let private hands run society. And one way to do it is by shock therapy, which is a neoliberal economic doctrine used in Russia after the dissolution of the Soviet Union by Boris Yeltsin and in Chile after Pinochet's military coup. The doctrine involves mass privatization, price liberalization, market deregulation, and fiscal austerity measures. It's called shock therapy because it rapidly changes the structures of a country's economy and puts it all in the market's hands. In both the cases of Russia and Chile, this led to mass inflation and unemployment, and it completed the structures of the middle class, where the class between the rich and the poor became gigantic. But in the case of Russia, that went from a state-controlled economy to a market one in a matter of a few months. The country's main industries got privatized and quickly bought by the richest Russians, which created the famous Russian oligarchs that Americans keep yapping about, but quickly shut up about when we mentioned that they actually consciously created them. Shock therapy and state deregulation means cutting back on centuries of worker protection laws in favor of efficiency and profit creation. However, this profit then goes into the hands of a few capital owners that make their money not by working and creating value like the rest of us, but by simply owning the property that we work on. But a huge aspect that anarcho-capitalists like Milei choose to ignore is that the state is not a separate entity from capital. The state was created by capitalists after the French, British, and American revolutions to uphold capital, to create an institution of legitimate violence to protect private property from the working class. I mean, after all, these famous revolutions were led by capital and property owners. The aristocracies of the old may have been overthrown, but class distinctions were not. There's a reason universal suffrage took so long to establish in each self-defined democratic country, and why slavery existed for a whole century during even democratic governments. It was just democracy for the capitalist class, not for the rest of us. This is ironic because anarcho-capitalists and neoliberals like Milei and Yeltsin will always criticize trade unions, price control, and worker protection laws as government tyrants, but will always defend institutions like the police and the military, because those institutions were created specifically for the purpose of protecting capital and private property. Anarcho-capitalism is a hypocritical joke. It wants to privatize absolutely everything so only the wealthy, in their eyes the most deserving, run society. But the government is a necessary institution to uphold capital. Without the government, you don't have the police and you don't have property rights. So what happens when the workers realize that the capitalist class does not really contribute to the production process and decide to, seize the means of production for themselves? Well, that is where people like Milei love the government and love the police to put us in place.